Hello, Cubs fans, and welcome to a brand new edition of Cubs on Tap. You know me. You're probably sick of my voice at this point on the show. I am Ron Luce. I have a very special guest tonight. We shout him out all the time. We haven't seen him in a while on the microphone, but I'm very excited to be joined this evening by Mr. Bobby Foster. Bobby, before we get into anything Cubs baseball, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good today. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I can't complain. We have exciting stuff to talk about. I think that's where I'm at with Cubs baseball because, Bobby, I think back to the last probably two winter meetings. I know they made some noise, obviously, the year that they signed Jameson Taillon, and they made some nice moves. Obviously, Dansby Swanson was the big headliner. But it feels like otherwise the last few winter meetings have been very quiet. And this one has been anything but. And it's been kind of nice. I think baseball-wide, too, not just Cubs-centric. And it's been kind of nice to see some chaos and some shit happening when everybody's together in Dallas and they're inevitably getting drinks and dinner together and shooting the shit. And obviously the biggest news that's come out of all this is the Kyle Tucker rumors. Yes. And that the Cubs are supposedly the front runner, that this is more of a Cubs trade than it is a Yankees trade. We've heard the Giants and the Phillies mentioned, but nothing more really than just a team name mention, whereas player names have been kind of leaked publicly in terms of both of the aforementioned groups with the Cubs and the Yankees. Lucas Gill, your Rookie of the Year winner in the AL, he's being mentioned as the kind of wanted piece from the Yankees. And obviously from the Cubs, we've already heard the likes of Isan Paredes. We've already heard the likes of Seiya Suzuki. And we've even heard a couple of prospects. Obviously Cam Smith, Matt Shaw have been mentioned as well in this whole thing. So, I mean, Bobby, where do you see this going? Because you seemed a lot more optimistic than I did when we talked separately a little bit earlier in the day. Kind of what's going through your head with these Kyle Tucker rumors right now, and kind of where do you sit in terms of, you know, your positivity and optimism versus kind of your pessimism?
Well, as I was highlighting to you earlier, we haven't really felt this excited since the Correa saga 2 years ago. And I was optimistic back then. But with this, I feel like there's more smoke. There's more smoke to it than there was with Correa. So I kind of have my optimism a little bit higher than it was with the Correa saga. Pretty much, I'm surprised and I'm not surprised at the same time because the whole fit just makes a lot of sense. Tucker's supposed to make around $16 million this coming season. For that much talent, I can see the Cubs getting all over that, basically for the money, because while they're also trying to offload Cody, they want to also not leave his bat in the void and just say, oh, we'll trade Cody and then we'll just address it with like a minor signing. No, I believe that they want to either upgrade it or try and find something that's more up to that caliber of talent if they were to trade Cody, which it kind of means there's more smoke to that when it comes to the Yankees. I did see a report today, just now actually, that they're making progress on the money aspect, because this morning they were all like, no, we're not going to take on that contract. But according to John Heyman, there's some progress being made on that.
I think that's the key as a part of this, right? Because you kind of almost need to make both happen at the same time, right? It needs to be Bellinger's going to the Yankees, because then you officially take the Yankees out of the Tucker sweepstakes. And then you just look at the Astros and you go, okay, let's make a deal. Like, let's get across the finish line here. Let's make sure this still makes sense for both teams, because as has already been noted, he is going to probably test free agency. So unless the Cubs really are kind of, I'm going to say it. I know you're not supposed to say bad things in like the first 7 minutes of a show because YouTube doesn't like it. But if they put their dick on the table and they're like, hey, man, we'll give you $350 million over the next 8 to 10 years, I think there's a world where Tucker maybe says, nah, I don't need to go to free agency. You're giving me crazy money. Because let's be honest, he's not going to get Soto money.
No.
He's not going to get Ohtani money.
No.
But I think there's a world where he gets 300 plus. I would put him in that Bryce Harper, Mike Trout kind of echelon. I think he's kind of earned that. So you sit here and you kind of wonder, and you say, okay, would the Cubs even dare giving that kind of money to a guy for the long term? Because kind of like Scott says here, right? Says there's nothing exciting. Nothing's been inked for the Cubs. They're still an 82-win team. I kind of feel the same way. Like, the smoke is great. Like it's exciting. It's nice knowing that Jed Hoyer is actively trying to do something to improve this roster. But at the same time, I sit here with the concern of understanding that the Ricketts are going to be as cheap as they humanly can to still make a buck.
Yeah.
Although Tucker looks great for one season in Chicago at $16 million and would still be a welcomed addition. And sure, maybe you make the argument that you still got a top 10 pitching staff in terms of ERA. You have a bullpen that they're probably going to improve at some point here in free agency, especially with all the names they've been linked to, like AJ Minter and some of the others that are out there.
I got one more name for you. We'll talk about later.
Okay. Yep. And then you figure with all that kind of mixed in, like maybe, just maybe, they do enough to actually take a real run at this thing. And I know the Dodgers are the Dodgers, but like they're beatable, right? It took them literally putting together a super team to even remotely come close to a World Series. So you wonder, like, maybe, right? There's always that maybe of maybe they run into it and they get a chance and Tom laughs his way to the bank when Tucker leaves and Owen Casey's playing right field on a day-to-day basis. But the fact that, again, that they're trying to do something is so exciting, especially of this magnitude, because Kyle Tucker was a name that like was kicked around on Cubs on Tap. He was a guy that like mid-season that I was kind of saying like, hey, if there's any team I'm calling, especially with all the reports that the Astros wanted to unload salary, like what's Tucker's price? He's going to be a free agent the next year. Like, let's see what happens. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting there, man. I really do. I want to ask you though, Bobby, because I think I admire your baseball sense. I think you're on it, especially league wide. I'll tell people right now, in case anybody didn't know, Bobby would give me pointers for his baseball league that he invited me to this year because I couldn't keep up with the whole league. He'd be like, hey, this guy's really good. Go pick him up. Help me. I squeaked into the playoffs after starting 0-6.
Yeah.
It's kudos to you. What do you think it takes to get this deal done? Like, what does the package look like in your mind if the Astros are going to say, yes, let's do it, signed, sealed, delivered, ink to paper, he clears the medicals, Kyle Tucker's a Cub? Like, what's it going to cost the Cubs to land a bat like Tucker?
Well, I do think the reports of either a Matt Shaw or a Cam Smith are true. I think you got to part with one of them. And my opinion, I'd rather part with Cam Smith. I like Matt Shaw too much. I do think that the Suzuki and Paredes aspects will have to be included in this trade, especially with Paredes, because if Bregman doesn't sign back with Houston, let's say he goes to Detroit, which I think is a very good fit up in Tiger Town, they're going to need a third baseman. So Paredes would fit that bill. I'd probably do those two, Cam Smith, and maybe a lower level prospect just to sweeten the pot. But yeah, I think that's probably what it would take. And for the Cubs, they're going to have to realize all these contracts, the Juan Sotos, the Otanis, they're just going to go up. So you can look at Kyle Tucker with his magnitude, his star power. A $350 million contract is going to be drop in the bucket compared to all these other superstars that are going to come down the pike that are going to want those types of contracts. So I think the Ricketts have to be over the moon if they can get a talent just like this, sign him to something like 350, 375, and then go from there. Because then they would have their cheapest superstar compared to the Sotos and the Otanis, whatever Gunnar Henderson's going to get in Baltimore or Adley Rutschman. They got to keep in mind that if you want one of these superstars, you're going to have to go past the Dansby Swansons and Jason Hayward contracts to get it done.
Definitely. And you look around the league too. I think this stems larger than just like, well, the Cubs need to come to play, but not everybody else is coming to play. It's like, no, other teams are coming to play. Like a perfect example here, and I'm pulling up the exact number because I can't remember it off the top of my head, is Bobby Witt Jr.
Oh, yep. Kansas City. I was just going to bring that up.
Look at the money that Kansas City, of all people, dished out for this guy. And now, yes, they went a lot of years, and he's a young player, obviously, right? He's only 25 years old right now. Like, him making $16 million this year, I mean, he's $26 million against the luxury tax, is beautiful. But in hindsight, like, that's almost a $300 million deal that they handed out. Like, consider this. The Kansas City Royals have handed out a larger total dollars contract than the Chicago Cubs have in their franchise history. Think about that. The Cubs made the third most revenue in baseball just 2 years ago in 2023. And yet the Royals are handing out bigger contracts. Now, granted, that one looks awesome. Bobby Witt Jr. is a superstar.
Yeah.
But to your point, Bobby, you put it perfectly. This is going to be the cost of business if you want a superstar on your team. Unless you draft a guy and you keep him at arbitration dollars for 5 years, only to watch him leave and go somewhere else.
Yep. And what helps this too is that he's not a Boris client.
Yes.
I read somewhere he's got similar agents with Swanson. So
yeah, so maybe
before.
Maybe that's an in. Maybe you can talk to Kyle Tucker and say, look, man, we want you here for the long run. We want you to be a part of this thing for, the foreseeable future. What's it going to take? Yeah, he's with Excel Sports Management. So yeah, absolutely not Boris Corp.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think, Bobby, especially in today's day and age of baseball, we've seen an aging Max Scherzer, an aging Verlander make $40 million in a season?
Oh yeah.
We've seen that already. We're seeing guys like, Juan Soto is going to make $51 million a year in New York. I mean, that's crazy money. Kyle Tucker at $35 million a year feels like nothing. And let's say, right, he's 27 years old. So when you're extending him, right, the first year of the extension is going to be 28.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you only get 7 to 8 really good years out of Kyle Tucker, that contract pays for itself.
Yeah.
That contract pays for itself, especially with what the Ricketts have. Like, I hope this is maybe the Ricketts finally looking at this and go, you know what, Jed? Go for him because we're ready to pay up. We're ready to bring that guy in that we think is going to be cheaper than what Juan Soto wanted. Because the Cubs might have just looked at this and been like, we know what Juan Soto is going to get.
Yeah.
And we're not going to spend that on one player. But if you can spend half of that on one player, maybe it works. Especially if you get rid of Cody's money, even if you keep a little bit of it for one season.
Yeah.
You get rid of that. I mean, he's just such a dynamic, game-changing player. And Tyler has blown us up in the comments. He's joining us from his cruise that he's on this week. But this is his latest comment, and he's absolutely right. Like, this highlights how good Tucker is. He had a 4.7 WAR, and he only played 78 games last year. With his totals in 78 games, he would have been the second highest home run hitter in terms of total numbers on the Cubs. And he played half a fucking season.
Yep.
Like, that's Kyle Tucker. I think a lot of people have not truly appreciated, and Bob, I know you have, but what Kyle Tucker is as a baseball player. And I would like to share a quick couple of numbers with people here. So he's almost 28 years old. He'll be 28 in January. So he'll be 29 effectively the first year of the extension. Cool. Still give him the 10 years. I don't give a fuck. Over the last 1, 2, 3, we'll call it since 2021, because that's really when I feel like he became Kyle Tucker. His lowest OPS is an 808 OPS, which was in 2022. He was still an all-star that season. He still had 30 homers, 107 RBIs, 28 doubles, and 25 steals to go along with 71 runs scored. He was a 5.4 WAR player. He's been at least in seasons that he's played at least 100 games. He's been a 5 WAR player every single year. Actually, more than a 5 WAR player. In 2021, he was almost a 6 WAR player. As a 917 OPS. Last season, if he didn't get hurt, 993 OPS last season. I know it was only in 78 games, but he was that good. 13 doubles, 23 homers, 49 runs driven in, still stole 11 bags in 78 games, slash 289, 408, 585 in just 78 games. He was a 4.7 WAR in 78 games. Like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Like, I honestly think Kyle, like somebody, I think it was a good old friend of ours here at Cubs on Tap, Mr. Cody Del Mendo. He's now obviously with CHGO Cubs. It might have been him that said it today that I saw in a clip that said, maybe not, he's not a superstar, he's a star. I would argue he's a superstar. It's just he's played in Houston with a bunch of other superstars.
Oh yeah. He's on that level, like a hair below the Judges, the Sotos, the Otanis. Then you get into the Tuckers, the Witts, the Gunnar Hendersons. That kind of B level is where he's at. And that's something they desperately need, because they can't keep doing this patchwork of, we'll get these guys with high floors and just pray that they overperform their expectations. They can't keep doing that anymore. So the idea that, oh, we can't trade these prospects for him. Oh, he's only a 1-year rental. They have set the bar so low that they need to do something like this. And it shouldn't be just viewed as a negative. It should be viewed as, hey, we're trying here. We're trying to get an impact talent. If he doesn't sign, he doesn't sign. But you have to take that risk because they don't take risks anymore. And it's maddening that they don't do it.
It's definitely maddening. And Tyler said this a little bit earlier. He said hello, and he says he doesn't care if it's just for one season. He says you do whatever it takes to land Tucker. Prospects are prospects until they're no longer prospects. My favorite saying in the whole wide world.
Because for every Chris Bryant, you're going to have a Josh Fitters or a Brett Jackson and an Arismendi Alcantara. You just don't know.
And unfortunately, a Brennan Davis.
Yeah.
Who we're just seeing now leave the organization.
Yep.
It just goes to show you never know what's going to happen. And I agree. Some prospects are more feel closer to hits than others, right? Like I think most people felt pretty confident in Javi Baez, Addison Russell, Chris Bryant. We're all going to become at least major leaguers, right? Maybe not what they became, right? Yeah. Javi was an MVP runner-up. Chris Bryant was an MVP. But at least they're an everyday major leaguer.
Oh, yeah.
I would make the argument, Bobby, and maybe this is going to be absolutely spicy. I think I'd be okay parting with Matt Shaw. I personally believe, and again, nobody knows more about the Cubs prospects than the Cubs do. I think Cam Smith is going to be a better baseball player than Matt Shaw is. I think his ceiling's a lot higher. I think Matt Shaw's floor is a lot higher, but I think Cam Smith's ceiling is way through the roof. I think that kid's got unbelievable potential. And it would suck, especially for one season, seeing either one of those guys depart.
Yeah. I have a soft spot for Matt Shaw because I think he's a Dustin Pedroia with power. That's just what I see, because you can trade Nico to Seattle, get yourself a starter, and then have Matt Shaw get ready for second base. Third base, you've got tons of prospects. You've got the James Triantos if you want to have him at third, or if you want to have Matt Shaw at third. He's very versatile. Sure. With Cam Smith, he's just coming off being the first-round pick of last season. If you can bet on yourself as a talent evaluator, someone like Cam Smith is someone you can part with because you're seeing more of Matt Shaw. You're seeing more of what he can do in your system. And that's something, from what I've seen, I want to see more of, and I want to see up at the major league level this coming season. But that's just me.
No,
since they're giving you a choice, either Cam Smith or Matt Shaw, you can take Cam Smith.
I think that's a fair argument, right? And I think too, though, I think there's a world then that maybe I'll ask you this, and wanted to highlight Jason here in his comments saying hello, and he thinks Chet will strike out again. And I understand the pessimism.
I agree.
I'm telling myself the same thing right now.
There's still a part of me that's going to be like, hey, he's going to screw this up. He's going to say, I can't trade Seiya. I can't, even though you can.
You can, and I understand. It was Sam Olber that put it out in the socials today over at Locked On Cubs. And he said, you want a Tucker to pair with a Seiya bat. And I agree. Like in a perfect case scenario, like if the Cubs can finagle like Paredes, Cam Smith, and maybe like Jordan Wicks and maybe another prospect, and maybe it's a top 30 guy, but you give a little bit more value there. I think that's best case scenario when it's all said and done. I just wonder then, do you pivot? And this is a question for you, Bobby. Do you pivot the plan? Do you keep Nico at second and just say, Matt Shaw, you're our third baseman because we just gave Paredes to the Astros?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense in the world. I mean, you can do that. You've also got other prospects that are coming down the pike. I'm unsure of Ed Howard's status. I don't know what's happened to him since he got selected. And that's another thing. It's like, that's another thing. He's such a highly touted prospect, and then all the other better ones have come along, and he's been kind of forgotten at this point. But I mean, if you want to stick Shaw at third, go for it. I mean, I'm not opposed to keeping Horner. I just think that with the amount of infield prospects that you have, you can unload him for something you need, which is a right-handed starter. Because I'm of the traditional old school where you need balance. I like having Shota. I like having Steele, but I don't like having two lefties at the top of the rotation Or if you just want to get funny with it, Boyd as a third, which I doubt. You already have 3 lefties in your rotation. 4 if you want to have Wicks.
Mhm.
And I just think you need more balance in that aspect.
I
And
agree with you.
that's where someone like a Luis Castillo comes in, which I know you're not as high on, but I think he still has some impact. He's an impact arm still. Because my top choice is Logan Gilbert, but I don't think they'll go for that.
That's also my
Luis,
top choice.
yeah, Luis Castillo isn't a bad constellation, Bryce.
No, especially when you consider the fact that he's 3 years, 73 million. Like the going rate for pitchers, that's a steal in today's, I'll call it in today's baseball economy. Like that, it really is. I agree with you. I think Gilbert would be my ideal guy. But like the Mariners have kind of the opposite problem of the Cubs. And that's why I think that's a match made in heaven where let's say Jordan Wicks doesn't go as a part of the Tucker trade. Let's say it's like Paredes, say maybe it's an Owen Casey, right? Somebody like that, right? Let's just hypothetical. Let's say you retain a Jordan Wicks. To me, Jordan Wicks plus Nico Horner for Castillo and another prospect is a beautiful trade.
Yeah, I can see that.
Seattle takes on a little bit, or pardon me, the Cubs are taking on a little bit more money, but you still get that front end starter that you're technically saving money, at least for next year, with Tucker coming in.
Yeah.
And if you're unloading Bellinger. And technically, if Seiya's a part of this, and if Paredes is expected to be due about $7 million, Suzuki's obviously going to make 19. So in the end, like the Cubs can make the money work if they're trying not to add too much payroll this season. It's going to be really interesting to kind of see where they go from there. Matthews is here in the comments, says Jed needs to show his worth. It's his last year under contract. Better do something. No playoff appearances since he took over. Absolutely. They've been a middling
assessment, yeah.
Like Scott said a little bit earlier, they're still an 82 win ball club as things stand right now. And Boyd's a nice addition, but he's not a needle mover.
Yep.
They need to continue to make moves. I think the Carson Kelly move, once it becomes official, it's amazing how that had legs and then vanished.
Yeah, it's close to a deal, and then we haven't heard anything
about it, right? I think he's the kind of guy that's perfect to pair with a Miguel Amaya. I really do. I think he fits exactly what the Cubs need. I know there's concern with the whole Gomes thing, but I think he's a better offensive upside player than Gomes ever was. Yeah. It's just Gomes had a really good 2023.
And I can't get mad at them like most fans are on Twitter about, oh, you just signed a backup catcher. There's not really any out there.
No, it's an awful free agency market.
They tried for Logan O'Hoppe last trade deadline. That didn't work. I mean, you're getting choices of Danny Jansen, Carson Kelly, Kyle Higashioka. It's slim pickings, and Carson Kelly's at least a solid option. I mean, he showed more of a career revival with Detroit after all those years in Arizona as being a part of the Goldschmidt trade, but he's still a solid player if you sign him for a 1-year deal and you have this faith in Ballesteros.
Definitely.
He's a nice bridge to it. I mean, they even view Amaya as a backup catcher, so I doubt that he's the starting catcher over Kelly. So you get at least a veteran presence behind the plate for your young pitching staff. So,
and a veteran presence behind the plate for a young pitching staff who's a very good defensive catcher. Like the metrics show, he's a solid defensive catcher. I think he would pair perfectly with the pitching staff. He would help keep the run game in check, which I think was something that we all know bit the Cubs last season. Guys were able to just steal at will, it felt like, against the Cubs catchers. So certainly would be an upgrade there. I certainly agree with you. It'll be interesting to see what happens with these Kyle Tucker rumors. But Bobby, this was, kind of a knee-jerk show here tonight. But I do want to ask you, because I know you got some spicy stuff for us. What are some predictions, players you want to see the Cubs go after? We technically still have a few hours left in the winter meetings. I know tomorrow's kind of getaway day, right? Yeah. Most people probably take off by 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So you might have some stuff in the morning still if teams trying to push maybe trades across the line, maybe a Kyle Tucker deal, for example.
Yeah.
Who are some guys that you want to see the Cubs come away with over the course of the rest of the offseason? Because obviously we still have all of December into January, probably even a little bit into early February. What's on your mind in terms of your kind of Cubs wish list, I'll say, for this offseason?
Well, for the bullpen's sake, I do appreciate a good left-handed reliever to go in that bullpen. Because, I mean, Luke Little was the only option from the left-handed side going into last season. And a report I had just seen was that they are heavily interested in former Brewer Hobie Milner. the left-hander. So old Craig Counsell acquaintance. That could be somebody who could do a really good job in the bullpen. I did write about the other day Danny Coulombe from Baltimore. I mean, he's one of those guys that Jed would salivate over. Guy in the back nine of his career somehow finds a career revival in Baltimore. Pitched a couple games in the postseason. He's someone that they could look at. They need bullpen arms. They need experience. They need guys who can just someone who you look at and go, okay, yeah, that guy I can turn the ball over to. I can have him as a bridge to my closer, which they still need a closer.
Right.
They need a proven one. They need an established one. I mean, if you want to go get Kyle Finnegan, that's fine. He had a solid year last year. He's not like an all-star, but he's still pretty decent. But just, yeah, I just think bullpen is a very touchy subject with this team. They don't like to allocate a lot of resources to it. They just think they can do it with smoke and mirrors. I just think they need at least one reliever who's proven. I mean, Hector Neris was proven, but he wasn't a proven closer. He had faults in his game going back to the Phillies days. And if they look to Porter Hodge as the closer, to me, that just makes it seem like they learned nothing from last year with Alzolay. So
fair.
Yeah.
I think that's the key. I personally I think Jorge Lopez coming back would be awesome. He was really good for the Cubs. He's already familiar. He has closing experience. So to your point, right, if Porter Hodge, God forbid, he gets hurt or something like that, you have a backup guy who knows how to close baseball games.
Yep.
I don't know about you, and I know he's not a closer per se, but I think it would be a very welcomed arm. I agree they need a lefty. I know Minter's name we mentioned a little bit earlier has been out there. You mentioned the former Brewer. I really like, and I've done more and more research on him, Andrew Kittredge.
Yeah, that's a fair one.
He had a really nice season last year with the shitbag Cardinals. He had a 2.80 ERA. He pitched in 74 games. They used him a ton. But I think the reason he makes so much, to me, feels like a guy that Jed would like, he fits kind of the mold of what we've seen the Cubs for their right-handed relievers. He's got a slider. He's got something that breaks the other way. He's got a sinker that really has a crazy amount of break. And he throws a traditional fastball. You've kind of got the tunnel with the three prong. And on top of that, he also he's in the 100th percentile in chase rate. That's all dudes do is chase against him. And that's something the Cubs really don't have in their bullpen. So to me, he's a guy that you probably could get for maybe $4.5 million for 1 or 2 years. He's 34, so he's a little up there in age. Maybe you only give him a 1-year deal, but that feels like a good signing to me. Scott from Iowa here saying sign Jeff Hoffman, Kirby Yates, David Robertson. I would expect probably Robertson and Yates to get 8 figures. At least me personally. I know Yates is old and he's 38, but he's coming off a sub-2 ERA season. I would fully expect him to get probably close to 10, which I don't know if the Cubs are willing to do because Robertson just got off making 11.5?
Something like that.
I don't know if he's going to get that same money either, but he's 39.
Yeah. I don't think he will. I think he's got too much mileage on that arm. I don't think teams are going to go that high on him. If he had like a 20, 21, 22 Cubs year, I think he could get that. But at this point of his career, not really.
Agreed. And he still had a good year last year. He was a 1.75 WAR player, which if you go by the relief pitchers on the market would put him as the 4th best reliever out there. But the guy who's the 3rd best, which is Jeff Hoffman, I think would be a nice addition. Only 31 years old. He'll be 32 soon. But this is a guy that was almost a 2 WAR player last year as a relief pitcher. Those are the kind of guys that you would hope you could get. But I know Hoffman is rumored to be potentially a starter, kind of like Clay Holmes is right now. With the Mets after he signed there. So really interested to kind of see how some of these play out. But Kittredge is the one guy that I'm kind of keeping my eyes on just because I think he flies a little bit under the radar. Okay. And that feels like a Cubs signing. I feel like they like guys that fly under the radar, especially from the bullpen. But
there is another reliever out there who I think they probably would take a chance on. And it's probably a former friend actually in Chris Martin. He's said that he's going to pitch 1 more season, coming off 2 seasons with Boston. I feel like that's someone who they could look at down the line as another stopgap in a bullpen. But yeah, like you said, I'd rather have Jorge Lopez back.
Definitely.
I like what I saw from Tyson Miller. They found him pretty much. They brought him back pretty much out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
then
he's got tons of control too, so he'll be around still for
yeah,
at least another
definitely.
season or two, which is nice. I think he's actually still pre-arb, as crazy as that sounds, which is awesome. Like he's
Yeah,
dirt cheap. That was a bargain bin find of all bargain bin finds, if you're asking me for Jed. A quick comment here from, I believe it's Kieran. I hope I didn't screw that up. Paredes, Smith, Horton for Tucker is what they feel like could be a good package. I mean,
I would agree on that.
interesting.
I think a year ago I was more like protective of Cade Horton. Now I think I'm more like, all right, you can, if you want to dangle him, dangle him. But I
Yeah.
think that would be a realistic trade package if they want to take it. But I do see that they want Paredes and Suzuki, which in that case, I mean, go. just
Yeah.
do.
It'll be interesting. I'm really intrigued to see A, if this trade gets across the finish line, and B, I don't know if if we're gonna see it at the winter meetings, right? I think there's a world where this drags deeper into the week or even into the weekend if something does get done.
I think at at the latest, I think maybe a day or two after the winter meetings is probably when it'll happen. Pretty much since they've done pretty much all the legwork during the winter meetings, I don't think, because if this was like in the middle of January or November, I think this would be more prolonged. But since you were meeting all week between the two teams, I think it'll get something will resolve soon because I think Cody's got to happen first, and then they're going to go to Houston and do that. So
I think that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if we see a Cody trade before the end of the winter meetings. I think, especially if the rumors are correct and the reports are correct, where it sounds like they've kind of gotten the numbers a little closer, maybe they're able to pull that off before everybody departs Dallas Thursday. But it'll certainly be interesting to see. A couple of quick comments here. Kieran with another one says he knows Jesse Rogers said that he doesn't believe the reports of Suzuki and Paredes are both are 100% true. I think that's possible. I'm sure both of those names were probably the initial offer. They're like, hey, we'll take them for these two, and they're like, easy. Let's pump the brakes. We'll give you. I understand the love for Paredes, and I think that's why it's a match made in heaven as a trade partner, because the reports out there are, if you believe everything you read, and this was reported by Ken Rosenthal, so a very reliable source. He said that Houston was also in the mix for Paredes at the trade deadline and whiffed on him. He went to the Cubs, and Houston really liked him. Like, supposedly Houston was kind of the runner-up for getting Paredes.
okay,
The numbers also suggest, if you read any of those, that home run-wise, Paredes would do best at Minute Maid Park.
oh yes, he would be a very good benefit for the Crawford box over
Definitely.
there. Yeah.
So I can see the match made in heaven with a pull heavy hitter in Houston, and they clearly like him and have appreciation for him already. I think he's the headliner, quote unquote, of the deal, but I agree. I think they would need to beef up the prospect pool. It would probably be, like you said, Smith. Maybe it's also, a Horton, and maybe it's another like top 30 guy who's maybe on the back end of the top 50, the back end of the top 30.
Or if they want to introduce like a Canario or a Contra, somebody like that they want that's more major league ready in the outfield to kind of fill in for Tucker. So
Sure. Kieran also said, I feel like losing Bellinger and Suzuki both and only getting Tucker hurts more than it gains. Yes, he feels Paredes would really excel in Minute Maid. I agree there. The Bears Cave, a good friend of ours actually at the show, just a different name he's coming from tonight. He says, I love him, but I think Owen Casey is a good one to trade this offseason. I think it depends, right? Like if they fully intend on re-signing Tucker and paying him the world, sure, then I think Owen Casey's absolutely dangleable to fill a need elsewhere. But I think it comes with what intention do you have with Tucker? Like if it's just hey, he's a 1-year player and we're going to let him walk, I think they hold on to Casey with the thought that he's their full everyday guy in 2026.
yeah.
Another one here from DeBear's Cave a little bit earlier that I wanted to get to. He says, do you think we have any chance of Gleyber Torres? He knows he started out with them. Gleyber doesn't fit what the Cubs do.
No.
He's a terrible defender.
Yep.
He's got good power numbers, and he's a decent middle of the infield guy that hits for average or for power and can do some things, but they're not going to do, especially with how loaded the Cubs are, Bobby, like you said, up the middle in terms of prospect pool, Trianto, Shaw, the names go on and on. There's Torres is never going to come back to the Cubs. They departed with him for a reason, and I think it's just going to stay that way. And Scott says here, Tucker is looking for a 6-year extension. Shit. Pay him whatever he wants for 6 years. I don't care.
That I'm not entirely sure of, because pretty much the mantra of Jim Crane, the owner of the Astros, is that he will not extend players past 6 years. He doesn't believe in it. That's not his philosophy. So that's pretty much what is precipitating this type of trade, because Tucker realistically is going to get closer to 10 years.
That's kind of what I expect too.
He's 27. He's not going to ask for a 6-year extension, because that's what Houston is currently looking at and saying, that's not what we're going to do with our guys. We didn't do that with Correa. We didn't do that with Springer. We're not going to do it with you.
Bregman, right.
Yeah.
They kind of did it with Jordan, but they kept him kind of in that ballpark of that 6-year number. And so far it's worked out for them. One last comment here from Kieran. They say, I think Shaw is the third baseman of the future. I think Shaw would play better at second. I just think his skill set fits the position better. But like you said a little bit earlier, Bobby, I think he's certainly a guy that can play third.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to like go after a Tucker, you're obviously going to have to do more in the offseason. You can't just acquire him and say, okay, we're done. We're going to try it now, which is basically, since you're moving off Bellinger, go look at Alonso, since his market is kind of dwindling. If you want to trade Nico, or if you want to move Nico to third or Shaw to second, either which one, you can have Bush in there, be a second baseman or a third baseman. They have a lot of players with versatility. So if you're losing Bellinger and you're losing Suzuki with that pop, you have a wide variety of options to do. You can have the polar bear at DH. You can have him be at first base. You can have Bush be at first base. You trade Horner. You can have Bush at second. There's just a lot of things that you can do if you add that one more power bat in free agency.
I think the big key with what you just said, Bobby, because I love everything that you just said, Kyle Tucker filling right field as a Gold Glover is huge, because now, assuming you move off, let's say, Bellinger and Suzuki, Owen Casey could DH if you want to get him up sooner.
Yeah.
Matt Shaw could DH on some days. Michael Bush could DH. If you do go sign Pete Alonso, he doesn't have to play first base every day. Yeah. You can use that DH spot for him. That's the only downside to keeping Seiya Suzuki, is he's probably your everyday DH. Yes. So that spot is occupied by Seiya. Whereas if you move off Seiya and you move off Bellinger, and let's say you add Tucker in, to your point, if you do want to get spicy and say, hey, Pete Alonso, we realize nobody's calling you, because we haven't heard shit about Pete Alonso's name in the winter meeting so far.
No, maybe, and I don't think he's not a candidate to get somewhere around the 7-year range. I anticipate him getting like a 4 or 5 year deal at this point. So I could see 5 years, probably around like that $30 million mark, which I think if the Cubs move off both Bellinger and Suzuki, they might be willing to do. Yeah, and because he doesn't have the term then, and like you said, you can move Bush around a little bit. Maybe Bush auditions for third base again, which I think is where people initially expected him to play after having a really strong year at first. I think it opens up a lot of possibilities if you can put Tucker in the lineup and he's playing right field every single day, because he can play the position aptly defensively, especially at Wrigley. Like, he's a Gold Glover. Like, this is a guy that would do just fine in Wrigley's right field. You can keep Happen left as your other Gold Glover. PCA is a Gold Glove caliber center fielder. He was third in the league in run value last year, and he only played how many games? I mean, there's something to be said there, when it's all said and done. A couple of quick comments here, Bobby, and then I want to get a final thought from you before we sign off. The Bears Cave saying Shaw, Ballesteros, and Cam Smith are untouchables for him. Hank saying Cam Smith has the arm talent to stick at third. I completely agree. The Bears Cave again, he says, I hate to say it, but Bush doesn't really feel like a Cub. He thinks finding a good way to get some good value from in a trade and get a very powerful first base is the Steed. Again, kind of with the Alonso idea. And he followed that up saying Vladdy or Alonso, he'd be happy pursuing. I think Vladdy's going to cost too much. I think Pete's the nice one because he just costs you dollars. He doesn't cost you assets. He just costs you money. Whereas obviously like a guy like Tucker or a guy like Guerrero, they're going to cost you assets on top of potentially money as well. Bobby, final thoughts for us before we sign off. Well, I hope there's some news that happens tomorrow, and I hope Kyle Tucker is right under my Christmas tree. So That's all I can hope, because if it's down to them and the Yankees, the Cubs have a better ability to offer a better package. I know they like, from the New York side, I know they like Luis Heel, but other than that, it's like they're going to have to add more from their mid-tier levels of prospects, because Luis Heel is a nice starter. He's got 5 years of control. And I find that hard to believe that the Yankees, who recently have had difficulties developing homegrown pitching, that they would want to move off of Heel so bad. I mean, if you want to include like a Clark Schmidt in that type of trade with some prospects that you have, you could do it. But if I'm the Yankees, I would hold off. I would keep Heel, because, I did the same song and dance last year with Juan Soto.
Mm-hmm.
I emptied the cupboard with Michael King. I mean, I could afford to move Kyle Higashioka because I had Austin Wells. I had Trevino. It makes so much sense in the world for the Cubs to do this, because they're at the point where they have enough ammunition to get this done. And nothing should be stopping them from doing this trade other than themselves, unfortunately. It's right there. It's right in front of you. This isn't Juan Soto. This isn't somebody you're like, oh, I'm going to have to pay him $800 million. He's right there for the taking. Do it. Stop lollygagging. Get it done, because there's so many times that they have just sat and twiddled their thumbs and have just become so complacent since Theo Epstein left. Now is the time to get bold. Even if it's only for 1 year, I can applaud you for being bold for once. So that's my soapbox.
Well said. Well said. I will just add that I would also like Kyle Tucker under my Christmas tree. I think that would be pretty sweet. And I too hope we have some news, because I think the plan is, at least for myself, somebody will be on the microphone from Cubs on Tap if something crazy happens the rest of the week or into the weekend or when have you. Obviously, as news breaks, we will be back. Other than that, Bobby, appreciate you jumping on with me this evening. As always, everybody knows the drill. Follow our friends over at Dingers. Follow us here at Cubs on Tap, and follow everything that On Tap Sportsnet has to offer. OnTapSportsNet.com and at On Tap Sportsnet on the socials. The On Tap Sports Network. Go and check out what's on tap in Chicago sports. Bobby, this was awesome. Hopefully, Kyle Tucker's a Chicago Cub. If he's not, was still great discussion anyway. We, as always, a huge shout out to our comment section. You guys were phenomenal as always tonight. We appreciate every single one of you. And Bobby, get out here the only way to know how. Fuck the Cardinals. Let's go Cubbies.
Yep.